So how we are going to deliver the questions, Thomas and I will take turns, and Mandy, Bree, you can flip a coin, whoever wants to go first, or we can kind of go back and forth, or just let it be organic and just kind of let it happen naturally. So the first question that we would like to know from each of you is, what does advocacy mean to you and your loved ones?
Bree, I guess for me, advocacy means to me, what advocacy means to me is to be the voice for individuals who feel or who are unheard. And for my loved one, I have a son who experiences autism, and advocacy for him means that I am going to speak up for him, and I am going to speak towards what he needs, what he wants, what he values, and ensure that his needs and his wants are communicated to school, to his providers. If he's not happy with something, I'm going to be that voice to say, hey, this isn't working. Let's do something different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be two sides of a role you're playing there.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, advocacy is a lot of what Brianna said, that, but it's also changed over the years. So advocacy was being the voice when my child was young, and now it's making sure that she's heard, and that people ask her instead of looking at me to answer for her, and just really creating an opportunity to educate other people who might not know about advocacy, and asking the individual instead of their parent, even though they're an adult at that point, or what have you. So it's also about teaching self-advocacy to youth and to children to grow up to learn that, I think is really important as well.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Mandy, speaking to the part of when did you notice, or when did you feel that it was important for your child, as she's starting to get older, to really take on some of that role and that responsibility? Was it just a natural progression, or did you have feedback from other parents?
So with my daughter's disability, she has a rare genetic condition that we only learned about when she was 13. So she grew up, and we had her growing up thinking that deafness was the only disability. So she was taught at an early age how to advocate for herself. That was taught through the school and taught through myself and various organizations about how to advocate as far as needing an interpreter, things like that. But as far as advocating, I think it's still something she's learning to fully do. I think she's really good at advocating for certain things. And then other ways, she still needs some support in doing that, or not me saying for her, but still some coaching or guidance, or asking kind of what would you do type of a thing. And, that might not be different from typical young adults still asking their parents for advice, or questioning or not knowing how to do things. She's 20, so she's kind of still coming into her own as an adult. So Did that answer your question though?
Good.
Okay.
Thoroughly. Thank you.
Bree, how old is your son?
He just turned 12.
12?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we're kind of right at that cusp of teaching him self-advocacy, and where, when to get him engaged in his IEP planning and his treatment plan, his plan of care, it's definitely, I feel like we're at that cusp in terms of how much is too much, and what's the right amount in terms of not overloading him, but also having him feel empowered.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of answered the question already, but I'll ask you again so everyone can hear it. How would you say that self-advocacy differs than like advocating on behalf of a loved one?
Self-advocacy, for me, I think it's the ability to know your strengths, know your areas of need, identify what are your future goals, and being able to identify those things, and then take that knowledge of yourself and effectively communicate that. Being able to communicate what your needs are, what your wants are, how to effectively and productively argue those points as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then also realizing, you can't get everything that you want.
Mm-hmm.
So where's the common ground? What are areas for needs, wants, desires that you can negotiate and compromise on?
Mm-hmm.
Advocating on behalf of a loved one, I think it's still, it's different in terms of you have to know that individual. You need to know the person that you're advocating for. You need to have conversations with them. You may be the advocate, but you don't get to call the shots. This is someone else's life. Like,
Yeah.
you need to tell them, or not tell them, but you need to have conversations. Ask them, like, what do you want different? What do you want from this? What are your goals? What are your desires? What do you want life to look like a year from now, 3 years from now? If we can't get exactly what it is you're looking for, then what is something that you can live with? What's something where you're still getting those needs and wants met, but also, you may have to work a little harder on trying to get the rest of the, whatever is not captured at that moment, then, kind of come up with a game plan in terms of how am I going to get these other areas fulfilled?
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it's a fine line of, like what you said, this is what the treatment team, the family, this is what we really want for goals, and this is really what we want to strive for, and maybe your loved one, your son's like, yeah, nope, I don't want to buy into that. So I'm sure it's a balance that you have to play as a parent, working with the treatment team and these levels of professionals, and here's your loved one who may not totally understand, well, this is really what you need.
Mm-hmm.
You may not see it now, but
I have those conversations with my son almost every week. Right now, he's really upset. School's over, but we're still having him do an hour of academic every day with his provider agency. And he is not happy about that. He does not want to do work. He doesn't, school's over. He didn't qualify for ESY this year, which was the first year ever.
wow.
He was really excited.
Yeah.
So he feels like it's a bit of a slap in the face that he now has to do, academic work for an hour, but it's just trying to explain to him it's an hour. It's not going to be 3 hours, 3 times a week like ESY was.
Mm-hmm.
And this is to make sure that when school starts, you're right at where you were when we ended the school year. You can pick up where we left off. And so it's having those kinds of conversations, even though he may not agree with it, trying to explain the why, I think is really important.
Yeah. Well, if you need some help, I would love to talk to him, because 3 of my children had it every summer. Oh, Mom, I have to do what for an hour?
Yep.
I have to do math. Oh, Mom. So, yeah, let me know.
And Mandy, if I can ask kind of the same question, just maybe in a different way. At what age was your daughter when you really started noticing her kind of begin to advocate for herself more?
Probably middle school is when it was emerging, but high school most definitely, especially when when her teachers who maybe didn't remember she had an IEP, didn't remember her accommodations. And so, she would come home and be mad about it. And I said, well, you can remind them. I said, I can do that, but it's good for you to say something to them, in private, and let them know that, that you do have an IEP and these are your accommodations for it. And I mean, just making sure that she understands the reasoning behind those. But I also agree with Brianna, it's a very, very fine line, and I'm finding that out very quickly with my 20-year-old, because what I want for her is very different from what she wants from her for her life. And she's self-advocating, and I've raised her to really to advocate for herself. And it's hard when when your idea of a good idea and her idea of wanting to do something don't align. So and again, that's just part of being a young adult probably, but so it's hard to separate the disability sometimes with just what's typical. But yeah, I'd say that definitely middle school was starting to see it more, but high school, and then especially in college, she had to do everything basically on her own, and still comes to me for advice, but it's all on her now.
So Bree, you talked a little bit about this with the first question. This one talks about what is the difference between being a parent and an advocate. So you talked about here was like the professional side, but then here's the parenting side. So can you speak to like, what is the difference between being a parent versus being an advocate?
I mean, I think they're, one and the same. I think there's a difference though in terms of informal and formal advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Informal advocacy would be parents, teachers, friends, loved ones. You're not getting paid to advocate on behalf of the individual. You have not had extensive, legal training, I think, but you still know the individual. You know them very well.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to be a support for them. They feel like they can trust you, and they can trust that you are going to support them and to express and communicate what your needs, wants, and desires are. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, I guess I struggle, personally, I struggle with the difference between what a parent and an advocate are, because I am a parent advocate, but then I've also had that legal advocacy training, and that was something that for me is hard to differentiate. What is my parent advocate hat versus what is my trained legal advocate hat, where I'm going to start, spilling state statutes and regulations to providers. There is a fine line in terms of how far I act in terms of my advocacy for my child.
Quite a balancing act, I can only imagine.
Yes.
And Mandy, with you being in, again, here's a professional role, how have you been able to balance that out?
So, I mean, I take all my experience and use that as an advocate in what I do professionally. But I must say that when it came to my own child's IEP, even her last IEP, it was still very different to advocate for your own child versus advocating for someone else's. There's that, not that there's the lack of emotion, but there's a separation of that you do want to do what's best, but for the most part, you're able to remove the emotion out of it for advocacy and just stick to kind of facts and factual things. And because being a parent, you're going to be emotional about your child and advocating on their behalf. I also think that the advocacy role is maybe not only for one specific person, but groups of people or targeted groups or individuals. But I don't know. I think that it's very different for me. And there are times in certain aspects to where I do have to change my hats and say, okay, I'm speaking as a parent right now and fully, state that. And then there's times when I'm strictly just the advocate and able to use my personal experience, but also, my training in my advocacy work for special education as well. So, yeah.
Well, thank you both.
All right, so next question, I'll ask you, Bree. In this whole advocacy scenario here that we're talking about, what were some barriers that you have encountered and kind of how did you work your way through them?
Gosh, barriers. I think getting buy-in from others. As a parent advocate, sometimes I feel like I would come across professionals who, because I was not a professional within that field, they thought their ideas may be, more effective, or, they weren't necessarily willing to listen to what input or what suggestions or what I had to contribute. And that, I think, was my biggest barrier, especially with regard to IEPs, especially behavior plans. My son has, he experienced a lot of physical aggression, and he, was restrained a lot. He was secluded a lot, and it's really difficult in those situations when you have, an individual who has very acute behavioral needs on what's the right thing to do, and trying to, I think there are sometimes disconnections within our system, having community agencies communicating with the school district, everyone working together and sharing all the information that works, what isn't working. And that was, I think, my biggest barrier with my son, was getting everyone to be on the same page and to implement interventions and behavior plans that were the same across all environments. That didn't happen with my son until, the probably end of his 4th grade year. But I will say that, in 4th grade, he was restrained and secluded at least 60 times. Once we got that behavior plan in place that we had been utilizing as a family, his community agencies had been utilizing, once we got the school on board, restraints went down, seclusion went down. He no longer was suspended. Like, oh my goodness, talk about suspensions. He was suspended quite a bit. All of that drastically reduced within that first quarter of implementing it. It wasn't happening anymore. He was able then to start engaging and going into the general ed classroom with no special education support for the majority of his school day. So he went from an SBBS self-contained classroom with 4 other kids and 6 adults to then going into the general ed classroom with 30 other kids. And he has a TA that will maybe come by, check in. You need help? Are you doing okay? All right. They go about their day. So it can be frustrating. It can be really emotional, but it's really important to just keep that goal in sight and keep pushing and try and find other ways to effectively, communicate, hey, this is really working. You know, find your, you know, your support groups, have them advocate with you. You know, when you have more people that have bought into it and can express, hey, this works, you know, it helps move things along.
And then Mandy, the same question for you. What are some barriers you've seen your daughter run into?
Well, I think one of the main ones growing up is that people had certain expectations because of a label or the disability itself, and then thinking they knew exactly what that looked like. And that was both in society or in the school setting. Like in society, you know, people, because she's deaf, she also has cochlear implants, uses sign language, but she can talk very well. And so people would assume she could do things like read lips or do things. So I think those assumptions are a huge barrier. And then in school, people not giving high enough expectations maybe, and giving that room for growth, because some people, you know, didn't think that someone can be in special education and then take, you know, advanced classes or, you know, be on the honor roll. And it's like, yes, both can happen. They're not mutually exclusive. So, and making sure that people recognize that, and not just in her, but in other students as well. So I think it's making sure that people, just like, you know, if you know one person who experiences autism, you know one person. And I think that's very true for all disabilities, really, is not to generalize things, to really, and I do it too, and you got to check yourself, because you shouldn't assume that any one group of people have certain characteristics or only experience certain things, or, you know, can't do certain things or the other. So I think that's a huge barrier.
Most definitely. Well, I'm sure both of you are going to have a lot to speak to this next question. So what has been or would have been helpful to know when advocating for the needs with schools, the medical providers, oh, here's a good one, family and friends? Looking back. You want to roll with this question first, Mandy?
Sure. So it would have been helpful to know just what, I guess, what expectations were for each of these systems, I guess. And it would have been helpful just from the get-go to realize and know in myself that just because they have degrees doesn't make them smarter than me about my child, and advocating for the needs, because it's been a long, hard road with my daughter, and she was premature and had many medical issues when she was young. So really having to quickly find my voice as a young new parent with a special needs infant. You know, I had to fire a couple medical providers right off the bat, and go to different ones because they would not listen to me, and just really trusting myself and what I knew about my child. For family and friends, oh my gosh, that, you know, it can be very, very isolating having a child who experiences special needs. And I'll say that even as an adult, because they just do not understand the amount of extra time it can take, the different accommodations needed, how you want everything to be as normal as possible, but that it's still going to look different. And just to have understanding or empathy in that, it's been very hard for me to find. So it's basically been family members who have been helpful. So just knowing, I guess, to trust yourself and to just keep advocating for what you think is right for your child.
Definitely. What about you, Bree?
I think what would have been helpful for me to know, especially in the beginning, Mandy touched on this, it's expectations. For me, people describe waiver services and how they're supposed to work and what it's supposed to look like. But I think sometimes, especially professionals, we have a high expectation of what this is supposed to look like. But in reality, it is not, it doesn't look that way. And the types of services, the amounts of supports, the parent training, like all these things that you kind of have these expectations for may not meet what you had, what you thought or expected or assumed. And so I think that is where you can run into conflict with agencies, with providers, where you feel like they're not doing or providing the service that you've been described. And so it's really important to, I think, have conversations with your agencies, with your providers, with your care coordinator in terms of, this is the need that I have and my son has. And this is all we're seeing, this is all I can manage to accumulate for him. Do I have too high of expectations, or am I just not looking, or, am I looking at the wrong agencies or systems to meet that need? And so I think that was something that I had a bit of a hard time with, especially, I confused waiver services with complex behavior collaborative. The two go hand in hand, but you're not going to receive the same intense level of support from just the waiver as you would with complex behavior collaborative. In terms of like family and friends, it's really isolating. Having a child who experiences a significant disability and who is, very physically aggressive and melts down, and it doesn't matter, where we are, who we're with. Those meltdowns can last, hours at times. And so my experience was, people kept telling me, I need to spank him more. I need to spank him more so that way he stops hitting. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. We have ABA support, and ABA has been instrumental in reducing a lot of the challenging behaviors. However, ABA and implementing a behavior plan can seem really counterintuitive to people. It is not, sometimes, especially individuals who are kind of grown up with that old school, do as I say, I'm going to give you something to cry about. I was raised that way. My mom is like that. And so I will say, I've had a difficult time in terms of advocating for my son, in terms of, when he's doing this, you need to do this instead of this. And trying to change some of those ingrained parenting styles, I think, is really difficult. With friends, even to this day, that's an area that I really need to venture out and build, because when you have a child that's experiencing difficult times often, there's a lack of empathy. Individuals don't want to be around that, or they don't want their children around that. And so it's been very, very isolating. And for me, I didn't have a lot of social supports. My supports were concrete supports. They're providers. And while that's helpful, you can't talk to your DSP about, like, you know, how you're feeling emotionally and get emotional support from those staff members. And that, I think, kind of leads into, like, self-care has been something, advocating for what my needs are. I am so focused on advocating for my son and making sure that he is supported. I learned the hard way that you can't give if what you don't have, you know, so you really need to make sure that, like, it's not selfish for you to say, Mom, you know, I need to get out of the house at least once a week for an hour and a half. You know, hey, partner, can you, you know, I need you to step up and watch the kids so that way I can go do something that fills my bucket. And I mean, that's been, I think, my biggest barrier is letting go of some of that nurturing so I can nurture myself.
Well, and you also think about, well, here's the child that you really have to make sure that they have all these needs met. But a lot of times there could be more children in the home, and they're going to have other needs. And then, like you said, oh, then there's a partner. So now I have to understand and meet some of your needs. And so I'm really glad that you brought up about the self-care. And this is what I need to be able to continue to be able to be the support and provide everything for my child. That's key.
So this last question, I think.
Oh, wait, Mandy had something.
Sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that I'm also a sibling as well. So growing up, definitely my older brother, I learned what not to do very quickly, and because he got in trouble a whole lot. And so I knew growing up a little bit about disabilities and all that. But I can say as a sibling to that it is also very isolating and frustrating at times to be that other sibling who feels like you're left out, or the other one's getting all this attention. And it's, you know, needed attention. Yes, it very much is, but to also know as also providers to check in and say, oh, how is, you know, whatever the other sibling or so-and-so's sister or brother, how are they doing? And do you need supports for them? And sometimes parents don't even think about it because they're so hyper-focused on what's right in front of them, that this one need, that they may not realize it. So I'll just say that, and we can go on to the next question.
Oh, thank you. Great add-on.
I was going to say this last question, if you guys don't mind, maybe we can all answer it because it applies to kind of parents, advocates, professionals. And that's just kind of what can Stone Soup Group provide to better assist advocates? And then kind of what type of advocacy training do advocates need? So I'll give you guys my answer. I think for me, when helping someone that comes in that's advocating for themselves, the best thing that I can do is get them the resources, give them the guidance, but, you know, let them do it themselves and kind of encourage them to do it themselves and say, look, if you go to this agency or if you call this place and you don't find out what you need, call me back, come back. I'll be glad to help with kind of A, B, and C, but really kind of just giving them the tools and kind of like teaching a kid to learn how to ride a bike. You know, you can hold them and give them a boost, but sometimes they got to start pedaling those pedals themselves and steering it themselves. So I think just for me to continue to encourage people that you can do this yourself, you know, and don't focus on what could go wrong, but focus on all the things that can go right, you know. So that's kind of my answer.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of what you said. It's talking with people and sitting down and having open discussion about here's what they might need, not only for themselves, but then for their family. So we're looking at, it could be a whole variety of needs, and we might need to go in a lot of different directions, but it's also important to really narrow that down, because there could be a lot going on with families and they could be in crisis mode. So I found it very important to really identify what's the primary need? What can we do right here, right now to provide that support? But letting them know, here's going to be a plan. I'm going to be a point of contact for you. So letting them know that they're not going in a direction, starting something to where they're going to be by themselves. And when we look at systems and we look at these services, home community-based services, oh my gosh, here's a process, and how long is it going to take? So it's also about, we talk about these concrete supports, but what are the natural supports? And I also like to focus on, what are you doing for you? And having just an open conversation and really trying to put them at ease. And it's again, it's not just like what you were talking about, Mandy. It's not just this individualized person. It's a family unit, and there can be a lot that needs to be addressed. So the ebbs and flows of getting people connected to what's going to help them. So it could be very fluid. It could be a lot of moving pieces, and that's kind of the direction that I like to go for when we're looking at sitting down and meeting with someone or meeting with the family. You want to pick up the baton and go with that one, Dan? We'll give our parents a little break here.
So I think kind of the same thing, just to kind of piggyback off of it. I like what Thomas was saying, encourage parents as well as self-advocates, give them the tools, kind of show them how to use it to keep that autonomy, give them the opportunity to sort of pursue different things that they may want, and then meeting them where they are in the process. So kind of figuring out where's the jumping off point, and then I guess kind of in the DDRC aspect, like if they come to us and they have, struggles with homelessness, they're looking at the DD waiver, they're looking at school issues and that kind of thing, like sort of figuring out which one is more important, which one do we need to really tackle right now, and then helping them connect with those resources, so that we kind of wrap around them with what we try and help out with, instead of just focusing on any one specific issue, I guess.
You're muted, Mandy. There you go.
Oh, do you want me to go? Okay. Well, my experience has been that both personally and professionally, that just giving exactly what everybody else said, yes, that encouragement and everything, but it's amazing how just saying you're doing a great job, or find something that they really are doing something really good at, because it's probably been a long time since they've heard that, or just that positive reinforcement, right? It's not just good for kids. So bringing up what is going right, and focusing on that, and then if there are other things you can do, let them know about other things that may be available to them. Also knowing not how much information is too much at any given time, but also allowing the family to determine that as well. So I like to make sure and follow whatever I'm discussing with a family up in an email so they have a hard copy of what we talked about, because a lot of times parents, their brains can get mushy when they're dealing with things that have high emotion. So following it up and saying, this is what we discussed, also some things to consider, are X, Y, and Z, and, that there are additional resources, and let me know when you're ready for that. And we can, further discuss these other possibilities. So kind of seeing what they need. But I think above all, really that positive reinforcement is key.
Mm-hmm. It is. I've met with a lot of parents or individuals, and they will express that they have no idea what they're doing, or are they even doing it correctly? And so you're definitely going in a good direction, and just giving them that reassurance that you are gaining some. So yeah, thank you. And we'll follow up with Bree.
Well, I think you guys have kind of
Summed
it up really well. I do think that teaching self-advocacy is huge. We don't want, for me personally, I don't want someone to feel like they don't have power or control. Provide them with those tools that they need to feel self-empowered. Professionally as an advocate, when parents would call, the biggest thing I could do was to be quiet. Let them talk. I don't know everything. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Let them talk about what's going on, what's the emotion, what are their thoughts. A lot of times, I think just having someone to vent to makes the biggest difference in the world. Even if you can't really, there's no reason, if there's a certain situation where there's literally, they're doing everything possible and it's just a tough spot.
Mm-hmm.
And letting them know, like Mandy said, provide that positive reinforcement. You are doing everything you can do. And being a listening ear. And I think that, Lisa, you're right too, in terms of not bombarding them with service, with resources, because you can start drowning in all of these options. And where do I start first? And if you're already so overwhelmed and anxious and you're lost and you don't know what to do, sometimes if I get a list of, a page that just lists out resources, I'm going to feel too overwhelmed to even, try to decide, who do I call first?
Mm-hmm.
What do I say to them? So just to, wrap things up.
Actually working with a lady right now, and currently that's the exact thing that's going on. I'm trying to encourage her to kind of do A, B, and C. She sends me her evaluation. I read it, and it's like one of the most comprehensive evaluations I've ever read. But then I send her a message saying, kind of, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. And now she is so overwhelmed with this email and what's going on that she's calling and saying, can we schedule a time where you can kind of go through this again with me and maybe simplify it a little bit. So yeah, I mean, a lot of folks, it does become kind of overwhelming, and they do need just to, okay, let's just work on step 1 today, and then we can worry about the rest of this email next week. Let's start with one little thing, and that's all we got to do.
I thought the door, I'm like, oh no, it's going to get you, Thomas, but we're good. So we are at the end of our lunch and learn. So Fontana hopped off, Marcus hopped off, but ladies, thank you for being a part of our panel. This is awesome. It really is. Love hearing just the outside perspective of things.